On October 15th, 2000, the second generation Pokemon game was released in Japan. By then, the Pokemon franchise had already built up quite some momentum from the first generation games, meaning there was already an established fanbase just eagerly waiting to jump into the new and improved Pokemon games. And improved they definitely were. Now, players could encounter an unusual Gyarados on the Lake of Rage. Unusual, well, because it was red. They called it a shiny Gyarados.
What?
Now, at first, players weren't quite sure what to make of this.
I don't know, it looks kind of suspect. Could be an imposter, you know.
A shiny Pokemon was the exact same as its non-shiny counterpart as far as the stats, typing, and moves go. The only thing that was actually different was its color and the fact that it was rare. 1 in 8,192 rare, that is.
Ooh, that's kind of small.
So, as we humans do with pretty much anything remotely rare, we started collecting these special Pokemon, and in order to do so, began collaboratively activating our underdeveloped D-Gen Pokemon fan brains to come up with new ways to speed up the process of finding and capturing them, which would turn into a never-ending cycle of wasting the precious time we have on this planet for stupid colored pixels on a 2004 Nintendo DS on a game that no one even played anymore. Thus, the shiny hunting community was born. Every mainline Pokemon game following Gen 2 would bring new ways of hunting down these elusive shiny Pokemon, and today I'm going to accompany you on an excursion into the past where we explore how shiny odds and how shiny hunting methods have evolved over the years. Now, this may come as a surprise to you, since I literally just said that shiny Pokemon were introduced in Generation 2. However, shinies did already exist in Gen 1, or at least kind of. What the fuck is this guy talking about? Just let me explain. Okay, you see, the way shininess of a Pokemon is determined in Generation 1 and 2 was by its stats. So if a Pokemon happened to have a specific combination of stats, the Pokemon would be shiny. The way this worked in Gen 1 and 2 was actually rather simple. Every Pokemon has a stat trait which ranges from 0 to 15. Back then, these were called DVs or determinant values, but since Gen 3, they're called IVs or individual values, so we'll just refer to them as such from now on. Now, IVs aren't the actual stat value you see in-game. Rather, they are hidden values in the game's code that determine the actual values you see in your game. In order to get a shiny Pokemon in Gen 1, you have to catch a Pokemon that has this specific spread of IV values. So the attack IV needs to be any of these values, and the defense, speed, and special values had to be 10. In Gen 1, a Pokemon with this IV spread would, when transferred over to another generation, become a shiny Pokemon. Now you may be wondering how the hell you would be able to tell what IVs your Pokemon had if you couldn't even see them in game. Well, luckily some very big brain people have designed a calculator which reverse engineers the game's code and allows you to see your Pokemon's IVs based on its in-game stat values. So to actually shiny hunt in Gen 1, you need to catch a Pokemon, check its stats and compare whether the stats line up with the IVs you need. If not, reset or catch another one. If they then do line up, congrats, you just found yourself some rare pixels in Gen 1. There is one more important thing to note, however, and that is that in order to be sure of a Pokemon's IV values, it has to be at least level 50. Before that, because of how the stat system works in Gen 1, it is not entirely possible to definitively determine its IV spread. So I think it goes without saying that shiny hunting in Gen 1 is slightly tedious, especially since there are no methods whatsoever of increasing your shiny odds. Also, a quick side note, if we know what IVs are necessary for a shiny, we can quite easily derive the shiny odds from that with some quick math. Pretty neat, eh? Okay, I promise, shiny hunting in Gen 2 got a lot more pleasant since we could now actually, see the shinies. While the base odds for shiny Pokemon remained the same, there were some tricks that helped you massively increase those odds all the way from 1 in 8,192 to 1 in 128. And it was actually quite easy to do. All you needed in order to achieve these odds was a guaranteed shiny Gyarados that you got fairly early into the game. You had to make sure that it's male, however, because of the way breeding worked in Gen 2. In Gen 2, the Pokemon species of the baby Pokemon would always be inherited from the female. Another important detail about Gen 2's breeding system is that in order for two Pokemon to be breeding compatible, they need to always be in the same egg group, except Ditto, who is compatible with everyone. Let's say, for example, I wanted a shiny Ekans. If you manage to get your hands on a female Ekans, you can breed this with your male guaranteed shiny Gyarados, since they are both in the dragon egg group. The resulting baby Ekans will have a 1 in 128 chance of being shiny. There are people who claim that you can get up to 1 in 64 shiny odds in this game, and while that is technically true, it is very hard to achieve. You could technically achieve 1 in 64 shiny odds if you were to breed with a shiny Ditto. Why does this work? Because the resulting baby Pokemon can only be shiny if it is of the same gender as its shiny parent. So our baby Ekans would only ever have been shiny if it were a male, like our Gyarados. And since Ditto is a modern Pokemon and therefore is gender fluid, the resulting baby can be of any gender and still be shiny, therefore doubling your 1 in 128 chances to 1 in 64. So if you could get your hand on a shiny Ditto, this was on average going to be twice as fast. Besides this breeding method, there wasn't really a way of increasing your shiny odds in Gen 2. So if you were out searching for shinies in the wild, you were stuck with the full 1 in 8,000 or so odds. Yeah, good luck with that. Generation 3, one of the most, if not the most popular games for shiny hunting. And that's for a good reason. These games had some of the best looking shinies. Even in 2023, I still believe that Gen 3 was one of the generations that had the best looking shiny Pokemon. What Gen 3 didn't have though was literally any method of increasing your shiny odds, like at all. No matter what you do, you are stuck with 1 in 8,192 odds. Well, at least Game Freak introduced 2 new features which helped trainers out a little bit. They added an ability called Flame Body, which, if the first Pokemon in your party had it, would allow your eggs to hatch twice as fast. They also added an ability called Illuminate, which massively boosted your encounter rate in the wild. And since the encounter time in Gen 3 was already quite low on its own, this was one of the more effective ways to hunt shinies. The item called Wide Flute has virtually the same effect as the ability Illuminate, however their effects stack. So if you have both, you will be encountering Pokemon pretty much every step you take. Besides that, however, finding shinies in these games might have been rewarding, but you definitely had to work for them. But then again, isn't that what makes shinies special? Oh, and also, because Game Freak apparently wasn't capable of programming a working RNG system, soft resetting for legendaries just didn't work. So yeah, that doesn't make things easier. There were ways of kind of getting around this, but that would take a while to explain, and for anyone interested, I'm going to leave a link in the video in the description that will fill you in on the specifics of soft resetting in Gen 3. Fourth generation Pokemon. Oh boy, this is gonna take a while. Let me tell you, these games were paradise for shiny hunters. No shiny locks, the introduction of the Masuda method, raider hunting, double battles, so many legendaries, quick starter hunts, item glitches, just so many fun things to hunt with, and just also a wide variety of options when it comes to odds. So first things first, the Masuda method. The Masuda method is a name that fans gave to the most popular way of shiny hunting through breeding. Why was it called that? Well, supposedly because it was our boy Masuda who was the one who coded this feature. The way it worked was actually quite simple. All you'd need is to breed the Pokemon you would want to get in shiny with either that same Pokemon or a Ditto just in foreign. This is critical. The method would not work if none of the parent Pokemon were foreign. Now, getting your hand on a Pokemon that originates from a different country would turn out to be quite tricky. Perhaps you would have known someone, or you could just search for communities online that helped you with this. If you happen to have a copy of the games with a different language, that worked too. The game really only checked for language, so if the Pokemon comes from, say, a Japanese copy that you just happen to own, a Pokemon from that game would have still allowed the Masuda method to work. Once you did obtain a foreign Pokemon, optimally a Ditto, and you breed it with your Pokemon you wish to hunt, the resulting egg will have 5 times better odds of being shiny. So that would be 1 in 1,639. If you are thinking of actually trying this method, you should make sure that the first Pokemon in your party has the ability Flame Body, because as we said earlier, this halves the amount of steps you need to take to hatch your eggs. Of course, you can't discuss Gen 4 shiny hunting without talking about the Poké Radar. This one's a bit complex, however I'll go over briefly anyways since it's just such a significant part of Gen 4 shiny hunting. I've marked this section separately in the timestamp, so if you don't care, you can just skip over this section. Okay, so the Poké Radar method works like this. It's based on a chaining mechanism where you can encounter the same Pokemon over and over again. The more times you catch/faint the same Pokemon in a row, the higher your shiny odds go, all the way up to 1 in 200. But of course, getting to that point is not trivial. You need a few things to make this work. You obviously need the Poké Radar, which you can get from the professor, I believe, after completing the game. You also need lots and lots of max repels, the trainer counter app, lots of Pokeballs, preferably repeat balls, since you would be catching the same Pokemon again and again, and strong Pokemon with high PP moves. Alright, first things first, you're gonna need a large patch of grass in which you can encounter the Pokemon you wish to hunt. And then activate your max repel, walk into the center of that large patch of grass and save your game. We do this for two reasons. Firstly, it means that if you mess up, you can reset your game and get all your repels back, saving you a ton of money. And secondly, it allows you to retry your first encounter until you actually find the Pokemon you want to chain for. Now use your Poké Radar. 4 patches of grass will begin to shake around you. Here it is crucial to differentiate between the different types of shaking grass patches. There's the standard shaking grass, leafy shaking grass, and the shiny shaking grass. The shiny patch obviously has a guaranteed shiny Pokemon in it. So if you ever see one, congrats, you just found a shiny. I mentioned these other two because whichever one you walk into first, you are going to need to walk into for the rest of your chain. If you walk into the other type of shaking grass, your chain will break. So you're standing in the middle of the grass and you have 4 patches shaking around you. The first step is to walk into any of these patches and remember the type of grass that you walked into. If it's not the Pokemon you're looking for, reset your game and try again. Once you found it, you can either KO it or catch it. However, catching is preferable here. Why is it better? Well, because of the way the chaining mechanism is implemented. You see, after you catch the first Pokemon in your chain and you've walked back into the middle of the grass, you will see 4 new shaking patches of grass. The way the game determines whether your chain will break is by literal random chance. To minimize the chance of your chain breaking, you should always walk into a patch of grass that's at least 4 patches away from you. And that's not an edge patch, for that will instantly break your chain. If you do this, your odds of the chain continuing are 89% every encounter. If you catch the Pokemon though, instead of KOing it, this goes up to 98%. The goal is to get up to a chain of 40, at which you will have a 1 in 200 chance for any shaking patch to be a shiny patch. The hardest part is getting to a chain of 40, because even if you do everything perfectly, you still only have a 5.5% chance of actually getting to that point without your chain breaking. So that's also not considering the absurd amount of things you can do on accident that will also instantly break your chain. Yep, that was a lot to take in. For those who still don't fully understand how that works, first of all, I don't blame you, and second of all, I've linked a video in the description with an even more in-depth explanation of how this method works. Oh, and also, soft resetting actually worked in this game, so you were able to hunt all these cool shiny legendaries. All in all, I must say, Gen 4 was a big step for the overall popularity of shinies and made them more accessible to a lot of people. And I must say the colors and the sprites were top notch, although still not quite as good as our next and objectively best generation, Generation 5. I am a self-proclaimed Gen 5 lover. I like pretty much everything about these games, mostly due to nostalgia, yes, but I like to believe that Gen 5 is indeed just better. So since I'm singing this generation's praises so much, surely this gen has a lot to offer when it comes to shiny hunting. I mean, okay, sure, there's only the Masuda method, but at least the shiny odds were better to approximately 1 in 3,000 instead of 1 in 6,000 using the Masuda method. So that's something, right? And hey, there's a ton of cool legendaries and mythicals to hunt, like Zekra, Reshiram, Keldeo, Genesect, Meloette. Oh, sorry, I forgot. Obviously, Game Freak hates his fanbase. My bad. they didn't even let us hunt shiny Victini. Shiny Lugs were introduced in Gen 5, definitely a questionable choice from the boys at Game Freak, but hey, it's something we have to live with. The reason I still love shiny hunting in this gen because, well, first of all, I like full-on shiny hunting because I hate my life, but also because of how clean and vibrant the shinies look in this gen. This is, in my humble and also very correct and factually checked opinion, the best looking Pokemon game, period. In Black and White 2, the Shiny Charm was actually first introduced, which is an item that you were able to obtain from the Professor after completing the National Dex, excluding mythical Pokemon, of course. This item raised the base odds from 1 in 8,192 all the way to 1 in 2,731, so the odds were quite literally tripled. Game Freak also decided to just give away free shinies in these games. Upon seeing all Unovan Pokemon, you could talk to the Professor who would give you a permit to go to the National Reserve, where you would just find a literal shiny Haxorus waiting for you. I think this is quite honestly a great addition to the games, which gave players more incentive to actually complete the Pokédex. Also, depending on your version, you were able to get a free shiny Dratini or shiny Gible after completing the Battle Tower. Again, more incentive to do stuff. I like it. October 12th, 2013. A dreaded day for OG Pokemon fans all around the globe, for it was on said day that the Pokemon franchise turned 3D. Besides being the generation which sent the Pokemon franchise down a spiral of mediocrity, Generation 6 also halved the base shiny odds, a change that is still in the mainline Pokemon games today. I have a whole video on my channel discussing how this impacted the quote-unquote worth of shiny Pokemon, but that's an entirely different topic. Gen 6 brought with it a bunch of new ways to hunt shinies. While the Masuda method and radar chaining still existed in these games, methods like horde hunting, chain fishing, friend safari, and Dexnav hunting all are brand new and extremely accessible ways of hunting shinies. This was really the time in which big names started to get into shiny hunting, with people like A-Drive really pushing the community to new heights. Again, this was simply because the Pokemon Company had changed its focus around this time to accessibility. The easiest and probably most effective way to hunt shinies in Gen 6 was through a method called horde encounters. Literally, all you needed for this was a Pokemon that was holding the item Honey or know the move Sweet Scent. If you use this item or attack in an area where horde encounters were available, you would automatically encounter a horde of Pokemon. This was very fast since you were encountering 5 Pokemon at once, all of which had the ability to be shiny. Chain fishing became the name of the game for anything that lived in the water. It was super easy to do since all you had to do was literally just find the Pokemon you wanted to hunt, sit in the same spot where you encountered said Pokemon and fish, 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 until inevitably you found a shiny. The only inconvenience with this method was the fact that if you received a message saying nothing seems to be biting, your chain would break. To combat this, you would simply have the first Pokemon in your party be a Pokemon that knows the ability Suction Cups, and boom, this message wouldn't show up again. The Friend Safari was weird. You were pretty much just running around in grass, and yet for some reason your odds just went to 1 in 512. But hey, I mean, people weren't complaining, I guess. Personally, I never really used this method, not because I didn't like it or because I thought it was a cheap way of getting shinies or whatever, but because it's the Friend Safari, so you needed friends to get access. Radar chaining! Yeah, it also exists here, but it works pretty much the same as in Gen 4, and I am not explaining that one twice. Fun fact, in Gen 6, or in 2014 to be precise, the first Safari Week was held. This was the first large-scale community-driven event where all shiny hunters would hunt in a Safari Zone. This is one of the big upsides of having a community grow so much over time. You can have events like these. These are just the kind of things that make you realize you're not the only person wasting countless of hours hunting rare pixels. Dex Snuffing was another simple and easy to use strategy to get some relatively easy shinies. From what intel I could gather, it doesn't seem like there is a chaining mechanism here, but rather you just straight up have higher odds using this method. This was nice because, well, if no chain can't break, right? Even though I dislike how Pokemon models look in Gen 6, and honestly 3D in general, it can't be overlooked how Gen 6 really made shiny hunting itself mainstream, and for that fact alone, I will be always thankful to this gen. Generation 7, the generation in which Game Freak decided to quit making games and instead become a charity organization and give out free shinies to everyone. Haha! I was of the opinion when the games released that, and I still am of this opinion by the way, that Ultra Wormholes suck. Because I do personally believe that if a shiny is way too easy to get, it loses a bit of its worth, and I'm sorry, but a 36% chance at finding a shiny is just plain retarded. Anyways, it was kind of cool to be like flying through hyperspace, hyperloop wormhole looking thingy. I'll give him that, but yeah. No. SOS hunting was the way to go for shinies not available in Ultra Wormholes. In case you don't remember this, well, I wouldn't blame you since Gen 7 is incredibly forgettable. But basically this method is called the SOS method because all you were doing is making the opposing wild Pokemon say,
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
And spawn a second Pokemon of the same species, except this one had again a chance to be shiny. So basically you were keeping an innocent Pokemon on the verge of death, forcing it to call for help and killing its friends until you found a shiny one, which you then encaged in your Pokeball for eternity. Oh, and the Masuda method still is here, of course. Shiny locks were still a plague, and hunting for anything remotely close to a cutscene was just not gonna happen in these games. This game had cutscenes longer than some core game loops. I have to say, Gen 7 was very middle of the pack when it comes to shiny hunting. Some great shinies, yeah, but a lot of them just became slightly more commonplace than I would have liked them to be. But hey, surely next generation won't make the same mistake, right? Yes, Gen 8, the gen where Game Freak started promoting mass murder of Pokemon as a shiny hunting method. You heard me. The higher your consecutive kill count on the same species of Pokemon go, the higher your odds go. This maxes out at 500 Pokemon murdered in cold blood. Wouldn't be surprised if this wasn't because Game Freak started feeling bad about you killing all the Pokemon, but rather because it was a method of preventing mass extinction. An important thing to note is actually only the odds of these brilliant Pokemon that are increased with this method up to 1 in 512 with a shiny charm. But these brilliant Pokemon themselves only have a 3% chance of spawning, which makes it debatable if this is even worth it in the first place when we could just have been basic and went with the Masuda method. But hey, the DLC brought a new way of shiny hunting called Dynamax Adventures. I think this is probably the most grotesquely boring ways to hunt shinies. I mean, sure, your odds are quite insane, 1 in 75, although I'm not sure I'd want to put myself through that, to be honest. Some people seem to enjoy it, and more power to them, whatever floats their boat. I didn't. I think Gen 8 holds the title for me for just the overall worst Pokemon experience there is. There was really no innovation here, and I'm not just talking the shiny Pokemon, it's just a massive disappointment. Legends Arceus, surprisingly enough, is the complete polar opposite to this. It might not have been very difficult to get shinies in this game, but the way they looked, felt, and the way you hunt them was just such an improvement over Sword and Shield. Who would have thought that open world would be a good concept for Pokemon to adopt? Huh, Game Freak, huh? I think a lot of people share this sentiment, and rightfully so. Legends Arceus was really a spark in what started to feel like a dying flame. Ballsy move to make this game, but hey, it paid off. Yes, a Game Freak classic. Make a cool new concept, but then make it worse. I don't know how they managed it, but somehow they made the catching mechanics worse here than in Legends Arceus. Honestly, don't ask me how, this is beyond me. On a real note, when I saw all of the shiny hunting methods for this game, I was kind of taken aback. I mean, especially by the Herba Mystica method, we've gotten to the point where you were legitimately able to find a shiny every 10 to 15 minutes. And that to me is just worrying. I've said in the previous video of mine that I believe the majority of a shiny Pokemon's worth comes from how the owner, him or herself, feels about it. It's personal, and that feeling of value can vary so much from person to person. However, I do still believe that when shinies become this easy to get, that a large part of what makes shinies valuable just goes away. At least to me, I barely hunted in these games because I just felt nothing while doing it. These shinies don't mean anything to me. There's no exclusivity here. None. Anyone with 20 minutes on their hands could get one of these. So I don't really see the point, to be honest. But hey, that's just me. I mean, everyone has their own values, right? At the end of the day, the shiny hunting scene has grown immeasurably over the years, and that is, I do believe, mostly due to the accessibility of shinies. Whether that's good or bad now is, honestly, I don't know, but this is the way it is right now, and this is the reality we all have to live with. Looking back, everything around shiny hunting has changed significantly. Yet the thing that makes it, at least for me, the core community remains unchanged. I want to take this time to thank the entire community for being just really supportive over all these years. All the people that congratulated me for shinies and motivated me even though they had no idea who I was. To some, saying these kind of words about rare pixels in a Pokemon game might be incomprehensible, but hey, I think most people who are watching this probably understand where I'm coming from. In my experience, the core community hasn't changed a lot over the years, and I only really joined when Black and White released, but from what I can tell, nothing has really changed in the community itself. And to be frank, I hope it stays that way because I think it's quite alright here the way it is.